Hello, it's the Old Geek, and this review has been nearly 2 years in the making. Many of you will already be aware that I have just one simple criteria for my long-form reviews. I must have played the product. Not just read it, but actually played it. And thus I give you Horror on the Orient Express. First published as a box set in 1991 for the 4th edition of the Call of Cthulhu game, a revised and expanded version was kickstarted as a bigger box set in 2014, and more recently the 2014 version was reprinted in the form of a set of 2 hardback books in 2021. I have the hardback book version of this campaign, and that will be my main focus for this review, though it would be remiss for me not to at least mention the later of the 2 box sets. To say the boxed versions were lavish would be a gross understatement. They were not cheap, but the sheer volume of material, handouts, maps and little extras that bring the era and setting to life that was provided made the outlay feel much more reasonable, and quite rightly, they are now considered to be collector's items. The hardback book reprint is the more affordable option, with the price having come down to the £40 to £50 range for the pair. Given that the 2 volumes total over 750 pages, that feels to me like excellent value. The box sets command high prices on the second-hand market. I've seen them go for in excess of £200, especially if they're in really good condition. So if you're looking at picking up this campaign, then if you're picking up to play, go for the hardbacks. Presentation then. The colour covers are smart. That's one of them. There you go. That's volume 1. And that is volume 2. And the pages inside are crisp and clear. Interior artwork and photos are all monochrome, and they complement the text very nicely. You also receive a large poster map of the train's route through Europe. Volume 1, entitled London to the Alps, begins with about 60 pages of introduction and background detail. There then follows 7 scenarios spread over about 200 pages. The remaining 120 or so pages of Volume 1 detail the plethora of NPCs, many optional, along with handouts, maps, keeper notes and the like. Volume 2, Italy to Constantinople, then dives straight into more scenarios, 13 in all, covering 335 pages, and then ends with more maps and a list of Kickstarter backers. If 20 scenarios are not enough for you, Chaosium also released Reign of Terror as a potential companion book to Horror on the Orient Express. There are 2 more scenarios in that book, but only the first of the 2 is directly connected to the main campaign, as it explains how one of the key villains came to be where the investigators find him. So, I said this video was 2 years in the making. Well, 21 months to be precise. Weekly sessions of 3 to 4 hours, with only a couple of weeks missed due to holidays. We played through 18 of the 20 scenarios in the main campaign, while also deviating to play through the 2 scenarios in Reign of Terror. It was a massive undertaking, and I must commend the stamina and the level of commitment of my players. One of them kept a journal as we went along, and this stretched to hundreds of pages. Another of my players drew the scenes and characters as she pictured them in her head, and many of those drawings feature in this video. The main campaign begins in London in early 1923, before whisking the investigators off to Paris, and then they follow the route of the Orient Express, down through Switzerland, into Italy, on through the Balkans, before terminating in Constantinople. Having spent some time in that city, the final 2 chapters involve the journey back to London for the big finale. Now, if you are a keeper who experiments with accents, this campaign will keep you on your toes. London, Cockney and posh, French, Swiss, French-ish, German, Italian, various Slavic, Turkish, and then you've got NPCs that are German, Austrian, American, Australian, Spain, Russian, it goes on. The reason for the journey is that the investigators need to acquire the broken parts of a powerful artifact in order to destroy them before they can be discovered by other villainous factions, including a skinning cult and an ancient undead being. So, time to focus on the meat of the campaign, the scenarios themselves, starting with Dancers in an Evening Fog, a beautifully titled London-based introduction. It's relatively short, it's low risk, it's a fact-finding mission that does a solid job of bringing the players together and involving them in the quest. It's not the most memorable of chapters, but then it's not supposed to be. It's just supposed to lay the groundwork. Chapter 2 is entitled The Doom Train, and it's an optional side scenario also based in London. Well, sort of London-ish. It's short at just 12 pages and likely to last about 5 or 6 hours. This contrasts perfectly with Chapter 1, because it thrusts the investigators into a gruesome and frenetic fight for their lives. It's fantastic stuff, I love it, and we had our first few casualties in this one. Chapter 3, The Blood Red Fez, is a Gaslight-era scenario designed to be triggered during Chapter 1, when the party find a specific piece of information. It's lengthy, packed with NPCs, and the players will be playing different characters. But it does feel too substantial to be played as the campaign suggests, embedded in Chapter 1. It's too much of a diversion when played that way because of the size of it. It's one of my favourite Call of Cthulhu scenarios, but I would run it first, before you even begin the main campaign, as a form of introduction. It does that job perfectly. The 1923 characters finally board the fabled Orient Express in Chapter 4, entitled Les Fleurs du Mal, and they make their way to Paris. And this is where the Keeper gets the opportunity to ramp up the ongoing dread, as one of the campaign's key villains is unleashed. The contrasts of this scenario work well. It features a delightfully innocent family, and the horror that is starting to unravel around them. I love that contrast, and I think this scenario is one of the strongest in the entire campaign. Chapter 5 is entitled The Dreamlands Express. It's another optional storyline. This one can be dipped in and out of as the campaign progresses, but my players showed no interest in the plot element that was used to trigger this scenario, so I didn't push it, and I chose to ignore it. It's essentially a whodunit set in Lovecraft's Dreamlands, and the main campaign plays perfectly well without it. Chapter 6 is called Nocturne, which is also the title of a Susie and the Banshees album. It's based in Lausanne, and it has the potential for some deliciously dark comic moments, with a backdrop of a dark and foreboding atmosphere. But my group were ultra cautious, and they missed the best bits, unfortunately. I like the scenario, but it does need a stronger hook to pull the investigators in. Chapter 7, Note for Note, moves the action to Italy and Milan, with a sick and sadistic tale centred around a doomed opera star. This scenario's finale is magnificent, but the clues to get to that point are a little vague. But persevere with it. Be patient, because the ending is worth it. Volume 2 opens with Chapter 8, Death and Love in a Gondola. It's Venice, and it's a twisted tale that brings the investigators into a love story and conflict with Mussolini's goons, all while tracking down a mysterious killer. Now, this scenario doesn't pop so much for me, so I used this mysterious killer in a more in-your-face way, and I had him come to the foreground more than is intended, and I think that made this particular chapter work a little better. It's not bad, it's just not the best. Chapter 9, The Dark Crusader, is an interlude set in Constantinople in medieval times. Now, while it is interesting historically, and it lays some of the historic foundations that help with the main campaign, I found its hack and slash nature to be jarring. It didn't fit with the ambiance of the other scenarios that we'd played up until now, and I think it's a little forgettable. With Chapter 10, Cold Wind Blowing, the campaign returns to form with the PCs in Trieste, and it's an entertaining and at times frenetic story involving the mysterious death of an archaeologist, a person who really existed, and whose death was never truly explained. This is something I love about Horror on the Orient Express, how it dips into real-world history and real-world mythology and twists it all in a Lovecraftian way neatly into the story. It's really, really good and really, really involving. Chapter 11, In a City of Bells and Towers, is, in my opinion, a waste of time. It's probably the weakest chapter of the whole campaign. But that's maybe because my players managed to circumvent the horror entirely. Had they been a bit more forward and direct with this chapter, I may well have enjoyed it a little more. But as it turned out, it was entirely a waste of time, in my opinion. Chapter 12 is called Bread or Stone, and now the characters are in Vinkovci in Croatia. Now, my players were really revelling in the darkness of the campaign at this point. And while the scenario is rather run-of-the-mill at first glance, it would go on to have a massive impact on our game, especially with the introduction of a specific NPC, who ended up joining the party. And my players really got into this scenario, which lifted it for me. And isn't that a good thing? Chapter 13, Sanguis Omnia Vincet, is another historical interlude, and this time it is an excellent one, set in the latter days of the Roman Empire and ending with a cruel twist and reveal. I love the ending of this one. In fact, I love the entire scenario, and I like the fear it induces into what are supposed to be stoic Roman soldiers. It's a scenario that works. It's there to bring some more historical foundations to the campaign's background. It does that really well, but it stands up in its own right. Little Cottage in the Wood, Chapter 14, leans heavily into Eastern European mythology and was one of the highlights of our campaign. It's a tale of blind loyalty versus deep-rooted evil. It's classic horror packed with familiar tropes that work. But the familiarity of those tropes is precisely why this scenario works, why the horror hits home, and why we as a group, I believe, really enjoyed it. They're tropes for a reason. Use them, abuse them, and enjoy them. Chapter 15, Repossession, sees the party reach Sofia in Bulgaria, and this is where a key villain is really meant to make his impact. But I'd involved him in the campaign a lot more than the campaign suggests by this point. So the impact that he should make when appearing here wasn't so great. However, it was still a really satisfying part of the story. Because I had used him a lot more, the party had got to know him. He repulsed them. He terrified them. They hated him. Thus, when he was dealt with at the end of this scenario, it worked really, really well. So Chapter 15 worked nicely, but the same cannot be said for Chapter 16, By the Skin of the Teeth. The big Constantinople showdown is a clumsy and extremely linear chapter, with several frustrating moments where the author has clearly expected the PCs to act in a very specific manner. Tip: they won't. This chapter really challenged my ability to pull events out of my backside in order to keep the game flowing, and just to keep the campaign working. My players were underwhelmed by this chapter too. It does have potential. There are some truly barnstorming moments. It's just the way that it shuffles the party between them is far too forced, far too linear. Chapter 17, Perfect Skin, is a short optional addition to Constantinople. I didn't use it. It reads well enough, but I'd had enough of Constantinople by this point and didn't want to linger there any longer than we had to. So, sorry Chapter 17, I didn't use you. Chapter 18, Blue Train Black Night, details the return journey to London, and it's a welcome addition, as despite the campaign's title, Horror on the Orient Express, the vast majority of the whole campaign takes place in the cities that serve as the train's stopping points. The exception is Chapter 3, The Blood Red Fez. So, by Chapter 18, they've actually had very little interaction with the train other than a means to get from city to city. So when Chapter 18 comes along, 15 chapters later, and it actually takes place on the train again, that works. It is a surprisingly flexible romp with an interesting cast of NPC characters, and I had a lot of fun with this one. Chapter 19, The Fog Lifts, is the true finale to the main 1920s storyline. It's short, but it's to the point. It's cataclysmic, impactful, and most importantly, entertaining. It's what it should be from a finale. There is one further scenario forming Chapter 20, The Simulacrum Unbound, and this is an epilogue to the main game set in modern times, and it is a return to the train, another chapter taking place actually on the train journey, mostly anyway. It's lengthy, it's complex, it's challenging to run, and it has a strong supporting cast of characters with a delicious villain, but so many potential interactions and accents to do. It is hard work for the keeper. However, it's well worth the effort. I loved it. Really enjoyed it. Horror on the Orient Express is a vast and varied campaign, and naturally there are highs and there are lows. Strong points are its attention to detail, the wealth of NPCs, the clever incorporation of familiar myth and history into its storylines, the variety of compelling locations, and the way in which the campaign builds over time into a frantic and frenetic finale. But the low points are significant. With so many scenarios, all written by different authors, with a ridiculous amount of moving parts, the whole campaign is a twisted bowl of Italian spaghetti that at the table must be unpicked and consumed strand by strand. It's delicious, but it is maddening. For me, this was made all the more challenging by the fact that I have the hardback release. The box sets would be somewhat easier to run as they are presented in the form of a number of smaller booklets, with maps and handouts all separate. There are moments of frustrating linearity. The tone and the focus of scenarios can lurch awkwardly from one chapter to the next, and there are continuity issues related to the likely turnover of player characters. So, would I run it again? Probably not. Did I get great value out of it? Absolutely. Am I glad it's all over? 100%. But will I miss it? Yes. It has been the most in-depth, the toughest, the most mentally challenging RPG campaign I have ever run. At the same time, it has also been the most satisfying. So here are some tips for running it. Make much more use of the villain Fenalik than the campaign suggests. Use him to isolate, to terrorise and torment the PCs in their sleep, to strike dreadful bargains and ensure they witness the terrible consequences that will befall them if they refuse to serve him. He's a fantastic villain. He's one of the most twisted and sadistic villains imaginable. Lean into him. Enjoy him. Also, create and murder NPCs with wanton abandon. Have Fenalik kill a lot of them. But give these NPCs defining traits, both positive and negative. That way you ensure you get an emotional response from the players when they see these NPCs suffer. They'll cheer when horrible people die, but then shed a tear when nice people die. But what happens if that nice person is married to a horrible person and is utterly besotted with them? Don't hurry the players, at least not too much, because the more they interact with each other, the environment and the NPCs, the more they get drawn into the game world, and thus the more impactful the horror becomes when it happens. Emphasize the horror with the mundane. There are a lot of MacGuffins. The party will occasionally miss them, so move them if necessary. You don't have to stick to the script. The players won't. But most of all, enjoy this roller coaster, this huge and immensely detailed wonder of the RPG world. So I expect you want a rating from me. Well, I'm going to give it 8 out of 10 if you are a determined and utterly belligerent autist who refuses to be beaten, like me. But it's a big fat 0 if you're not, because this is a campaign that demands your attention. It demands you work on it. It frustrates, it grinds at you, but it rewards you. So if you're not fully invested, don't bother. If you are, enjoy. I've been the Old Geek. I hope you've enjoyed this review. If you have, like, subscribe, comment, do the algorithm things, support me if you want to. If not, okay, so be it. Till next time, see ya.